Well, we were going to just record a normal podcast tonight, but me and Michael were sitting here like, let's just go live. It's 6:30 on Thursday night. That way this will go ahead and be up there. We're a little behind. So we're going to do a live recording. This will also show up on all the podcast platforms. So if you hop on here for a second and you don't get to listen to the whole thing, or you're late, you can go check it out over on any of the podcast platforms as well as on YouTube. It'll stay on YouTube. So we just figured we'd record live just for the heck of it and see what happens here. So I haven't had Michael on since our last live show. We talked about, what did we even talk about on that show?
We had a smorgasbord of stuff.
A smorgasbord of stuff. So that might happen again tonight. I think our main focus is going to be just kind of the springtime preparation all across the inshore and nearshore waters, with a large focus of the inshore fishing, targeting redfish, trout, flounder. One thing, honestly, that I learned last year is I really like targeting flounder, even if you can't keep them. It's one of those fish that is so ingrained in people that you catch flounder, you put them in the cooler, you kill them, you eat them.
Yep.
But man, going out and trying to target big flounder inshore and even off the beach is a lot of fun. So we'll get into that a little bit too. Before we get too deep into this, I see some people already hopping on. This is just a surprise live, you guys. We just decided to go for it. But we were just going to normally record and we decided to go live. But before we get into it, just a reminder, go check out Eastern Current Fishing on Facebook. Check out Eastern Current on Instagram. Go check out Michael on Instagram. It's Yellow Fury 18. And Jud Brock Fishing for me. Also, we want to tell you all about our sponsor that we have on the podcast now for a few episodes. It's First Class Glass here in Wilmington. You can check them out at firstclassglass.com. They've also got an Instagram page called First Class Glass, but just incredible boat work from little ding repairs on your boat, little gel coat fixes, to full-blown restorations of boats, putting new stringers, new floors, new transoms, everything in boats. Also, if you've got an old beat-up motor and you want to get it repainted, they completely repaint motors, and they can take your an old boat and make it look brand new. So First Class Glass, great place here in Wilmington, in North Carolina to go take your boat to if you need fiberglass work done. They do a lot of the warranty work for a lot of the dealerships here in town too. So very trustworthy work. And the great dudes over there. So go check them out, First Class Glass. Also want to thank iStrike Fishing, of course, and all the support they have on the channel. And just super, super stoked to work with them and use their jigs. And I think that's it. I think that's it as far as the pre-show stuff goes. So we got 7 people on here on this live. We're jamming. I think that's what happens when you don't announce it. But I was just feeling spicy and wanted to go for it. But well, sweet. What have you been up to lately, man? You got a new baby girl as of, how old is she now?
She is 6 weeks.
6 weeks old. So, that's crazy.
My fishing has been cut down a little bit.
Yeah.
I think I've gotten out maybe 3 times since she was born.
Yeah.
So, and that was typically, every week.
Yeah.
Week and a half for me. It was 3-4 trips every 2 weeks at least.
Yeah.
So
things change, man, but it is so worth it to just spend that time at home with them at that age, at every age. But man, it's just such a blessing, man. It's so cool, and yeah, Michael. I've been wanting to get Michael on here, but I haven't been wanting to pester him about evening time's so tough with the little kids, and so we'll have Michael on the show a lot more though as time progresses. But yeah, so we're obviously today when we're live right now, it's pretty cold. We've kind of got a little front. Hopefully this is one of the last fronts we see.
Hope so.
That water was creeping up nicely in the ocean. The bonita were starting to show up. Big bull redfish were showing up off the beach. Actually, I talked to some guys that have been smoking the big bull redfish about 10 to 15 miles off.
Oh, nice.
So that's it's so hit or miss. You could go catch them on one piece of live bottom or structure one day and go back the next 10 days and they might not be there.
Yeah.
But a lot of things are happening. The bonita are showing up north of us a little bit, so we should see them soon.
Yep.
I'm trying to think. Chopper bluefish. I heard chopper bluefish on the tower cam at Frying Pan Tower. So there's just a lot of the spring things that we're looking for. Some flounder inshore. But we're going to just talk about kind of what we're where our minds are at this time of year, how we're preparing for the transition of seasons and how the fish, change their patterns up. So what's some of the things that you see as key references to okay, things are changing a little bit. My practices and patterns might be changing on the water a little bit as well.
I think for me, I start with water temperature a lot of times. And then we even hit on this a little bit in our live stream that we did together a while back. But looking at like some of the schools of redfish, seeing how their actions are, how they're moving, how they're grouped together, that gives you a lot of indication of kind of where that water temperature is at and how the fish are feeling.
Yeah.
And, and kind of what's my next step. So once they start to spread out, the water temperature gets warm. You might even see a few mullets starting to show up. It's not really that time yet, but more of like the glass shad and some of that stuff. We'll start seeing a little bit of that. That's kind of the indicator to me. All right,
sure.
Let's go. I start like kind of in reverse. I feel like a fall time. I start getting closer and closer to kind of those deep holes, the big creeks, closer to the inlet. I'm going to go back to that kind of same pattern and, start focusing there and seeing what's coming in, what's using those major highways.
For sure.
And then once I locate either an area that's got redfish, flounder, whatever in it, then start to kind of work off of that.
Definitely. Something that you just said that is so key is those major highways. And like,
Yep.
one way people are always like, what are those major highways? But honestly, if you just look at Google Earth and look at your inlets and then the main creeks off those inlets, and they're going to show you where those fish are feeding into and where they're going to be feeding back out of, for whether it be redfish, trout, flounder, any of it. They're going to follow those systems and follow those currents, and it's going to be the same thing year after year. And I'm bad about sometimes getting sucked into the habit of like fishing the same stuff over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's where it's nice to have like the network we always talk about of people that are checking different stuff and we're sharing information back and forth, because it just opens your eyes. Like the more you learn, the more you're going to learn. The more you kind of like realize different patterns, different places, different techniques, different baits, like the more that knowledge just kind of begins to grow and snowball and whatnot. But yeah, those highways are key right now, and some of the things that I look for on those highways, like those main areas, so inlets and major creeks, is like primary pieces of structure, like the biggest piece of structure in those areas, deep areas. These fish, like we just had a cold front again, so these fish that are getting shallow also want to still be able to get off and get deep and get away from that really quickly cooling water. I think tomorrow's supposed to be 39 degrees in the morning.
Yeah. Well, that and we have a lot of pressure changes coming through.
A lot of pressure, yeah.
So just that weather pressure change on the barometer, those fish are going to swing. And I think that's what makes springtime as tough of a fishery as we probably can see.
Yeah.
Wintertime's always hard too, but springtime presents a lot of different challenges.
Definitely.
So.
Definitely, yeah. Springtime is, honestly, for me, it's one of my least favorite times to redfish.
Yeah.
At least shallow, because the fish are constantly changing up what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You can have some epic days. You can get on some fish that are really fired up, but staying on a consistent pattern day to day is way tougher.
Yeah. Last year I had one school of fish by middle of March. I was throwing topwaters at them last year.
Yeah.
Catching them. And then the next week, nothing. I could see them. I could watch them for 2-3 hours, throw anything and everything at them. Wouldn't touch it.
I think when they know those temperatures are going to be changing, the pressure is going to be changing, they just decide to feed on those pressure changes and those temperature changes. I've seen that they've been catching them really good up in the New River, the speckled trout, and catching them shallow again. So they've transitioned out of those deep holes. So finding those flats near deep holes and some of those stagnant estuaries, like the Pamlico estuaries and whatnot, those fish have been sitting in 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 feet of water. And they're now sliding up into those areas, those primary points. One thing that speckled trout do in those types of areas, they act just like bass, where like when they are leaving a creek, they stage on primary and secondary points, and when they're coming in a creek, they stage on primary and secondary points, and then also primary and secondary flats. So like the first flat that you're going to get into in a creek, or the second flat you're going to get into in a creek. That's where those fish are gonna kind of hang out, and it's just exactly like largemouth bass when they're staging to spawn and come up shallow.
Yeah.
Which is cool. But yeah, so I guess let's start with. I think it'd be nice to kind of break it down per species, if you will, and we don't have to stay super strict about it, but kind of talk about what the redfish are starting to do right now. And so from your experience fishing through many springs. What do you kind of look for when you're trying to go out and kind of find some of those springtime redfish?
Well, I had two approaches. So typically I'll start, once I start seeing my groups of fish that I've been fishing in the marsh during the winter time, like they're starting to spread out. You'll start to see them break up into smaller groups, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then I'm going from, like, let's say the area that I was catching them at point A, and I'm checking, half-mile radius kind of idea around it. I have an idea of where they're going to go because they're still looking for that same type of structure, that deeper spot where they can move shallow, but just with the warmer temperatures, they're wanting to start to break up, and they're wanting to go look for, food, whether that's mullet, mud minnows, whatever's showing up.
Yeah.
So I'll start searching around those areas where I've been seeing the schools of fish. And then also in the surf.
Yeah.
We get a good push of fish down the beach during the fall. And the same holds true when they come back in the springtime.
Definitely.
So, if you get a good weather day where you can go out and either walk the beach and look for them or take a boat out and ride the backs of the waves, that's a really good time to start finding them. Typically I feel like that you don't really see that until more of like the little glass minnows and that kind of stuff start to show up when you start seeing that bait in the ocean in the 3 to 5 mile range.
Yeah.
Then that's kind of the key indicator.
Like that 60-degree water temp. It's
Yeah.
kind of like the kicker for it, I feel like, which it's been 57, 58 on the warm days.
Yeah, I would say it's holding right around it.
Yeah, so it's about to break free. That's so true, man. Like some of the most fun red fishing that I get to do, and I feel like there's only ever like 2 to 5 times a year where I get on them good in the surf.
Yeah.
But that is so fun, man, sitting out there and throwing from the backs of the waves into them or standing on the beach and pitching out to them. And those fish fight so much harder.
Oh, yeah.
It can be the same 25-inch fish you catch inshore. But that's the other thing, too. Out there this time of year, like you can hang a 35-inch fish.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say the school, typically, like you see the schools in the marsh, they're kind of sized, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
Like, if you find one group, they're going to be 16 to 20 inches. You find another group, they're going to be 20 to 22, 24, whatever.
Right.
There's like a certain size class to them. Once you're out in the ocean, it's a free-for-all.
Yeah.
So
You'll see some studs hanging out there.
And two, I mean, when you get those really nice calm days where the water's just barely lapping on the beach, get your boat in close, get right up almost onto the beach and look for those fish, because when that surf isn't moving them around, they're looking for something to kind of hold to and give them that pattern to go up and down the beach and do their migration. So
for sure,
that's going to be the beachfront when it's not super choppy or anything, but it's bigger waves, that kind of stuff. They can't sit right up on the beach, but they'll sit down in those troughs. And
definitely,
if you're a surfer, you knew this from surfing in college, you look for the sloughs and the outer bars and different stuff like that is how you're going to put together where to look for those fish.
Right.
And don't make just one pass and be like, oh, nothing's here. If you find a good looking area, give it 5-10 minutes. Those fish aren't that much different than what you're seeing, in the creeks. In a creek, they might move around in a 400 or 500 yard zone. Out there in the ocean, a trough might be 400 yards long, and they're just going to make that circle in there, looking for that bait,
right.
Whatever, moving back and forth in that structure. So, give it some time, look around, keep your eyes peeled.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm just thinking about that day we had, I guess it was 2 falls ago now, where we were in the beach in the tower, and we were like, this is the day. There's a big school out here. And we're like about to give up, and then we're like, what is all that color up there? That must be it's bait or something. We get up there, it's like 800 redfish, like all 25 to 30 inches floating on the surface, and as soon as your jig lands in there, it's like and all I had was trout rods that day too, like tiny little trout rods, and they were just dogging us.
And they were right up, almost backs out of the water,
on that
2
bar.
feet, from the beach at some points, and they'd come back out on the bar and move around, and at that point too, like you said, that's when we saw them, like just out there floating on top of that bar, and
they're not scared to sit shallow out there.
No.
They'll sit in a foot of water or less sometimes. If it's really rough, I think they sit a little deeper, but when it was really, a lot of the days that it's rough, you can't do it from a boat. You got to do it from the beach. But a bright sunny day is the time to be out there. Bright sunny. You get a light wind on shore, not heavy, but just a light wind on shore that kind of cleans that water up. For some reason, when it blows offshore hard, it stirs that water up right on the beach better.
Yeah, I feel like it kind of eddies it or something.
Yeah, but a light onshore that seems to be the ticket. So,
and well, go ahead.
No, you're good.
I was gonna say this is a good time of year too, like the fall time. we're seeing other types of fish out there. I
Right.
mean, it's not just redfish that we're looking for in the surf. You might see sheep's head, you might see black drum, all kinds of stuff. And this time of year, you're going to start seeing that same thing again. Might be a few more weeks for kind of sheep's head and stuff to start showing up. They're a little bit more warm water than, say, the redfish and all, but it will happen.
I know that there's been some caught on the jetty already.
Yeah.
I've been catching a lot of sheep's head too at like 3 miles, 2
Yeah.
to 3 miles. So, but yeah, as far as getting in there shallow yet, they still want that 15 feet of water or more.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a cool time of year. And the other thing that people forget about is like those same speckled trout that migrate south in the fall are in the ocean migrating north in the spring. So you can go out there and catch them. I've seen guys that catch them on top water in the surf in the spring. And like, I mean, there's a lot of cool opportunities just right off the beach that time of year. So again, guys, thanks for tuning in to this live. If you didn't catch the live, it was just a surprise live. We're getting some people here chatting. Thank you all so much. And if you do love this live, let us know here in the chat box. We'll try to do more of these recordings live, and we'll try to be better about letting you know when we're going to record them. Spring's so busy. We've been fishing so much. We got kids now, and so we're getting an episode out every week. It's just tough to know when we're going to do it. So just keep an eye out on Instagram and on YouTube. I'll do some alerts on YouTube for these live episodes. But if you do love them, just let us know, and we'll continue doing them. But yeah, so there's just so much stuff that's transitioning, in and out. And what's cool to think about is so many of these fish that we see in the spring. We get some fish that kind of transition in and out, and we get other fish that are moving north-south.
Yep.
Which just, I've always thought that's kind of cool. And another, this just popped a random thought in my head, but I learned about 3 or 4 years ago that there's another fish that I get really excited to catch this time of year is cobia. There's 2 populations of cobia. And so there's like this big population of fish that moves in and out, like that we'll see in North Carolina. They move offshore, inshore. And then there's another kind of like subspecies that migrates way south and then comes back north.
Yep.
So it's like a pelagic cobia and like a nearshore cobia, if you will, which is cool. And I think that that north to south population is struggling, and that's why we haven't seen as many on the beach down here the past few years. But yeah, so what are some of the other things off the beach and right in the surf zone that you like to target in the springtime?
Albies and bonita. That's going to be the next ones that start to show up that I really enjoy. I don't mind fishing for king mackerel and stuff, but I like kind of the hunting and everything of like watching the
light tackle game.
Yeah, the albies and the bonita. So, but once it does get to that kind of king mackerel time, catching the the small snakes and teenagers on super light rods.
Jigging and whatnot.
Jigging and throwing kind of deep diver rapalas and stuff. That's a blast too.
Definitely.
So
yeah, when you can sit on a school of those things on some structure and cast those rapalas and just work them back to the boat. God, dude, that's so fun.
No, I mean, and that's the thing. Like once I don't know if people have started to find the bonita and stuff on off the beach, but that 10, 12, 15 mile range is like kind of the first areas that you really start to see them, and then you're going to notice they'll start to creep in and get closer and closer to the beach, and then it'll turn cold like it did this weekend. It might be gone. You may not see them for another week and a half, and then all of a sudden they'll start to come back. And I think that's a good way to judge once you start seeing them in that 3 to 5 mile range. It's kind of when all of this stuff is starting to kick off springtime wise.
Yeah, for sure.
We're right on the verge of it, but we're like in that funky month right before it kind of starts to go right now. I think that's just pressure's up and down, temperature constantly fluctuating, just makes it really, really tough. So don't get discouraged. Just keep fishing and knowing you know what you're looking for. It just may not be the day that it's gonna happen sometimes.
Yeah, definitely.
So
this time of year, like I was mentioning earlier, it's a frustrating time for me for redfish.
Yeah,
they get so. I mean, you can have some of your best days, but I want to go back and talk a little bit about kind of like that fishing structure for them this time of year. First off, I'm always going to typically go to the areas that I like to fish them shallow. That's what I prefer to do. If I'm going to catch redfish, I really want to, catch them in shallow water and sight fish them. Not that I don't. I really do enjoy catching them on structure in deeper water and using bait for them in that way, because it's fun to know. Like, it's fun to know when you kind of begin to understand how to fish deeper water and where to sit and how to orient on that structure. But when you see a big school of redfish in front of you, it's very obvious what you need to do. But when they might be holding on a rock pile or a deep 20 feet of water on a dock. Like it's just fun to me to like conquer that challenge. But that can be this time of year is a great time of year to fish deep pieces of structure. We got some chatting going on here.
Yeah, sorry guys.
No, you're good. Deep pieces of structure for redfish, whether it be docks, rock piles, the jetty. Like the jetty is such a great, and there's jetties all up and down the coast. Our jetties fishes a lot like many other jetties where it's a big time staging point and holding point for a lot of different types of fish, whether it be flounder, redfish, sheep's head, black drum, tarpon, cobia. I mean, all these fish kind of hit this jetty. And one thing that, you think about pinch points for fish. And so in and out fish, like we're talking about fish that are transitioning from off the beach to inshore, this doesn't play as true to, but like fish that are migrating north to south are going to swim around the tips of jetties. So like if you want to target, any of the species, redfish, trout, flounder, sitting out on the ends of those jetties and fishing can be really, really effective. I mean, you can have some great days and some big freaking redfish mixed in sometimes with them.
That's what I was about to say. Most of the time, the bigger fish that you're seeing most of the fish that you're seeing making that north to south migration are going to be bigger than the fish that you're seeing make that transition from in the marsh out of the marsh.
Right. Yeah.
So you're definitely able to target some monsters.
Definitely. That's a fun, and that's something I'm getting better and better at. Like to me, almost like that shallow water stuff now feels like it's not too easy, but it's the challenge of just doing it differently is fun, and it makes you better. Like we always talk about, try to be well-rounded and do a lot of different styles of fishing to become a better angler overall. Is if you love one thing and just want to do that, that's completely fine. But I'm the kind of person that I want to know how to go like catch a bass on a topwater or not topwater, but just some weird little bait, and then go catch a cobia, and then go catch a flounder, and then go catch a salmon or steelhead. Like I want to just learn how to do everything. But yeah, so big pieces of structure. Also think about inlets, but also like these big rivers. Like we've got the Cape Fear here, we've got the New River north of us, and as you get down into South Carolina, you've got a lot of large rivers that run up inshore. And those are some of the first areas, some of those brackish water estuaries that you'll see a lot of good bait. And so that's where a lot of these fish are going to stage. And a lot of our trout are going to hold over. Like speckled trout kind of hang out a little bit longer and spend the summers in areas like that a little bit better for us than they do up around Wrightsville Beach and Topsail. What kind of stuff are you looking for typically this time of year for speckled trout? Or maybe not now, but transitioning into the next month for speckled trout?
I feel like I'm still kind of looking for deeper holes or like good water flow on big points and deeper water. I don't know if I feel like that's just where I've had more of my success. Definitely. And I don't know if that's because, it's still kind of cold, so they're wanting to still hold in those spots. But even with, extra current, I feel like they kind of move a little bit more out towards like those creek mouths and stuff. They kind of are moving out of those deep wintering low current holes in the back, and they're starting to get out kind of towards the mouth of the creeks. But that's also where the first bait's going to start showing up as it's coming in from the ocean. So that's where I'll start kind of targeting, at least for trout, down south. As far as up here, clean water, it gets so tough and it's so hit or miss.
You can know exactly where they are here.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're going to catch them.
There is, even this winter is a good example of knowing where they were at.
Hundreds of them.
Yeah.
Piled up together.
Fished them, I don't think I caught a single one out of that school.
Yeah. And that, I think that boils back down to, and I didn't either. I didn't catch any trout out of some of those holes. And I kind of burned out fishing them on the wrong days when I shouldn't have been fishing them. But fishing those 2 or 3 warmer days right before front, that's when those fish will slip up and eat because they got to eat.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, they're really trout. A lot of trout don't eat much through the winter here, and so right now through the rest of the spring, those trout we have around, they will eat well.
Yeah.
Maybe not those clear water trout; those will still be a little bit tougher. But you get in the Cape Fear River, you get up in the New River, it can be huge. And I think one of the things that I love so much about big pieces of structure this time of year is you can go catch every single fish. On the same exact piece of structure, a lot of times using the same tactic. Like you could go fish a big rock point in the river and catch a redfish, a trout, and a flounder, all in this, within 15 minutes of each other, which is pretty cool. What does this question mean? How much do you guys watch the solar percentage?
Oh, like cloud cover, I'm assuming?
Maybe so.
I don't know.
I
fish when I can fish. That's kind of what it comes down to for me. When I get a nice day, it changes my tactic of what I'm doing. If I get a good sunny day and it's warm, low wind, I'm sight fishing. Yeah. But if it's going to be a cloudy, overcast day, that water temperature is not going to come up as much. I'm going more to those deep holes, and kind of sticking to that where I'm not having to visually look for those fish. Because, when you're trying to pull up on fish and it's cloudy, you might get 15 feet from them. You see them, and that's the same instant that you moved just wrong and you spooked them.
Yeah, 100%.
So it's not worth going into those spots and not being able to see the fish and messing it up, because you might mess it up for the next day or two, depending on what what you did.
For sure.
So.
And fish, some of those pressured schools this time of year can still be tough. You can have a really warm day and go in there and they don't want to eat well. So I think watching that, fishing the pre-front stuff is going to be your best bites for trout, flounder, and redfish. Yeah. Inshore. We'll get into that. I think, could you give some weak fish tips, which we can definitely get into? That's actually, we're just going to jump into it. So weak fish, gray trout, awesome fish that we have here in North Carolina. Unfortunately, I've never seen many of the big ones like you watch guys catch up north, like the big freaking 35 inchers and whatnot. But they're really fun fish to catch, and it's like deep water speckled trout fishing a lot of time when you fish them on jigs. The cool thing about this time of year is you can find them really quickly. A lot of times what I'll do is when I go off the beach and I'll go fish structure and live bottom for sheepshead, so I'm like crab fishing, and I'll just pitch a mud minnow on a Carolina rig a little bit behind the boat, 5 feet, 10 feet behind the boat, and just let that sit there as I kind of trolling motor and change around on pieces of structure until I catch a gray trout on it. Nice. And you'll weed through a few little sea bass, but until that water hits like 63, 64, there's really not many sea bass near the beach. So 5 miles and in, if you've got live bottom numbers or even on the ARs, get out there with jigs. I
say that's typically how I do it. Is little 1 ounce jigs and
for sure
dropping them.
For sure, and the mud minnow tactic is something I've kind of started to do while I'm fishing a crab for something else, because I've got to sit there and hold that crab and wait for a bite. Yeah, I'm gonna miss the fish if I don't, but I can put that circle hook with a mud minnow off the back, and a gray trout can eat it, and then I'm like, all right, it's worth jigging here. But also just sitting on those gray trout, at least in my experience, they're not sitting up on top of big pieces of structure. They're kind of sitting out on the edges and on some of the lower relief, and they will suspend, but they do mark really well. They'll mark kind of like redfish would on a graph, where you'll get like a little wavy line and maybe like a little wavy line underneath it. And there's a lot of spots I've been going to lately that we're catching 50 gray trout, and if you find them this time of year, they're super schooled up, and a lot of it's a lot of times, at least here in North Carolina, you'll have to weed through a bunch of dinks, some small ones, but we've been catching some 18 to 20 inch fish every time we've been out. But I would just say go hit a lot of any of those numbers that you have between 5 miles and right off the beach. I've caught them from 5 miles all the way to a couple hundred yards off the beach recently. So as far as jigs, like some guys really prefer metal, some guys prefer soft plastics. I will say it is really nice to have a treble hook on those gray trout when you're fishing vertically, because you got to think about the way that fish is typically eating that bait, and unless it's a really big fish that's going to suck your soft plastic down that single hook, you'll hook them pretty good. But some of the smaller ones you're going to miss. The treble hook will really step up your hookup percentage, but you will not pull those fish off if you hook them on a single hook, and that just kind of rings true with everything. But you have any kind of tactics you would like to throw out there about gray trout?
Well, I was gonna say, jigs are typically what I'm doing for them. Yeah. So, and I'll even switch from a treble over to a single. You got to think their mouth is just like a speckled trout. It's really thin, and I try to go as light tackle as possible, because I just don't want to horse that fish and rip its mouth. And not only are you gonna potentially be throwing that fish back, but then that fish has got to live for a while with a messed up lip and hopefully be able to feed again. So just a little conservation part there.
Definitely.
But if you're getting a good school of fish, treble, whatever,
Yeah, definitely.
So if they're eating well.
Do you have any specific colors you like for them?
I try to stick natural.
Natural color.
Black and silver. Sometimes I'll have like some chartreuse or blue in it, but just kind of the typical black back, silver belly kind of deal. So.
Yeah, they're fun fish. They're very cooperative. Like if you're on, they can be. They're fun to catch though, and one of the things that I've kind of learned fishing for them more over the past couple of years is a really heavy hook set isn't always the best thing. Like same with that soft mouth, you don't really realize how much pressure you're putting on them, especially setting the hook vertically. So I just will kind of lift into them and then speed my reel up when I know I've got them hooked, and that'll usually do the trick. Definitely. A net is important to have when you're fishing for gray trout. Same with speckled trout. Like you don't want to boat flip a big one. You don't want to try to grab them in the water with your hand. You want to scoop them up with a net pretty quick. Keep their head down in the water when they get up by the boat. My buddy Elias, he's got a YouTube channel, Elias Feed Fishing. He's got some small Mackinaw shad that work really, really well. It's a soft plastic that comes with a jig head that you can kind of jig on the bottom. And you can definitely, depending on what kind of structure on, you can cast away from the boat and work it back to you, which is, if you're trying to locate them, I would say that is one of the best options because you can kind of sit there, walk around your boat, fan cast all the way around it, kind of move to where they are. But when you can get on them and sit vertically on the school, and I can't tell you how many times the past 2 weeks, I've actually been doing a lot of great trout fishing. The past 2 weeks that, we'll cast to them and then we'll hook one under the boat. And then all of a sudden, you don't really see much on the screen, but then all of a sudden the whole school is right under your boat because that action's going on and whatnot. And the other thing to think about too is these areas that you've got with a lot of small gray trout on them right now, they will be areas that the redfish and the cobia are coming to hang out to eat those small gray trout. It's a great meal for those fish. And so, be ready with the bigger jig. Don't be afraid to drop a bigger jig. And if you're tired of little ones, upsize. Don't be afraid to fish. They're like a speckled trout. They'll eat a 5-inch swim bait on the bottom, so you can kind of get rid of a lot of those smaller fish by upsizing your bait. But yeah, natural's great. I don't think you can really go too wrong with color, but you can never go wrong with natural. And that's kind of what I end up fishing too. A little bit of green sometimes too.
I think just a little bit of green gives them something to see a little bit more than just the natural, especially within a big school. Something that stands out a little more. So
we had a question about fishing for the gray trout from a kayak. Personally, I don't catch many gray trout inshore. It's always bycatch. I will catch some, but I don't target them inshore much. But I would just look on some of the nautical charts, if you will, not maps, nautical charts, and look for some of those nearshore ARs and nearshore live bottoms. There's a lot of stuff right off the beach. I know some kayakers like to get off the beach in their kayak, others don't, but
just say, look on some of the charts for little areas of relief that are within that half mile off the beach. Definitely. And that typically can be a good staging point, especially if they're making that move up and down the beach. So
and I just saw another question about changing up baits. They're just like any other fish. They can definitely get picky, and sometimes sizing up is helpful. Not just fishing a tiny little jig. Fish something a little bit flashier, a little bit bigger. Think about a speckled trout. Those big speckled trout, a lot of times they're going to exert the energy to eat one big meal, less times a week than eating a lot of small baits. So play around. Definitely having an assortment of jigs, having an assortment of soft plastics to throw and bounce on the bottom can be helpful.
Yeah, and watching your flash and how, typically most of my standard jigs, I don't have anything, it's almost just sometimes bare lead. Yeah. And I think sometimes when you get into the flashy foil tapes and some of that stuff, these fish aren't sitting in, not all of them are sitting, 60, 70 feet of water. We're talking 30 feet or less sometimes. Yeah. And there is a lot of sunlight coming down, and that flashy jig can be enough to turn them off. Because it's still very reflective that far down. So, dialing back some of the flash sometimes
just like a matte jig almost, or a pale jig without too much flash.
So, and, we talk about bone white as a top water. It's white, but it's not flashy and bright. It's just
for sure
white. So, and that's what a lot of my offshore grouper jigs and stuff are, just a plain white with nothing else. Yeah. So
white just does such a good job of kind of being a part of whatever environment it's in. Yeah. It becomes natural wherever you throw it. And the other thing too, you said you might not have been right on them in this question. That's definitely part of it. You could be on, let's just say, the Liberty ship per se, and somebody could be catching them and you're watching them smoke the gray trout right there and you're 50 yards away and not catching them. I mean, I'm constantly jockeying around on trolling motor when I'm out there until I catch one, and I'll sit there, and if the bite slows down, I'm moving a little bit again. It's a school of fish. They're sliding around on the bottom, and if you don't have a trolling motor and you've got an anchor, I get that, but maybe try to go out there on a calmer day where you can slowly drift for them.
Yeah.
A lot of times too, a lot of outboard motor boats, if you kind of put your butt into the boat, into the wind, and kind of bump it in and out of reverse, you can really slow your drift down and control it way more than trying to keep the bow into the wind.
Mm-hmm.
So just slowing down and going over that structure, marking it, and then you can continue that drift where you hit those fish. But I would say if you got the opportunity, if you want to get anything for your boat for nearshore fishing, get a spot lock trolling motor, because especially for flounder, trout, everything, you can pick apart a piece of bottom so much better. And really understand where you're at. And then after that, I would say a good GPS unit. But as long as you can tell that you're on the relief or near the relief, the being able to make minor moves, I think, is more important than being able to really see exactly what the bottom's like.
Yeah. Well, and too, like, if you don't have a trolling motor, drive around your structure and make a couple loops, and then mark those spots and see how many spots you can line up with, like, a wind drift.
Yeah.
And that way you maximize as many potential areas that those fish are sitting.
Definitely.
That's what we used to do a lot of times with the Scout. When we go offshore, even inshore, bass fish, all that stuff. If we know there's a certain line that we're looking for.
Lake drifts or bass.
Oh, yeah. 45 minutes across First Lake. But, we caught fish.
We did, yeah.
So,
understanding what you have and the ability, or what you can do with what you have, and figuring out how to optimize that for the best deal. But a trolling motor, man, it's a game changer for sure. Or it just takes away that time of having to pull an anchor in, then hope that you drop it and reset 10 feet to the right. Like, it's at least for me, it is pretty impossible to do that. So with the days that I forget to plug my trolling motor in and I'm out there, or it's not working for me, like, I'm ready to go in before the day even gets started. But yeah, gray trout's just a great fish, and that's a fishery that's pretty depleted here in North Carolina that I would love to see bounce back, because, man, it is a rewarding one. Like, when you get on them good. When we were kids, man, we used to go off of Surf City up in Topsail and jig for them. And even back then, man, we were in the fall, we were jigging like, it was every freaking drop, and you were catching a 20+ inch gray trout out there off Surf City. And this one little spot, and we were the only boat ever out there. I wish I had the dang numbers for that spot. I do not have them. But yeah, they're fun fish, and it's cool to be able to cast, like, when you're sitting on a spot and bounce a jig on the bottom, and you get that feel of like a speckled trout too, instead of just sitting there vertically fishing for them. But I have never caught speckled trout on live bottom or off the beach, but I know plenty of people that have caught speckled trout in the same areas they're catching gray trout. So there's you never know. That seems like a great spot for a 30-inch fish to be hanging out. And also for a kayak too, like the jetty. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say that I've never stumbled into a big school of gray trout on the jetty, but they definitely get on the jetty, and I've definitely caught gray trout on the jetty.
Yep.
But upsizing your bait can definitely help you get those better bites on those things, and live bait. But what should we talk about next?
You were going to kind of talk about redfish and trout, so you want to talk about flounder?
Yeah, let's talk about flounder a little bit.
So,
I've started to see them. I've caught a couple inshore. We actually caught a 23-inch on a mirror lure the other day in like a foot of water.
Dang.
And we got into the boat, and it threw up like a 5-inch menhaden. I haven't seen a 5-inch, and it was like a fresh 5-inch menhaden.
That's crazy.
I haven't seen a big menhaden like that in a while.
Well, we were talking about the river earlier. The menhaden will start to show up in the river a lot of times before kind of anything else does, like mullet and some of your bigger bait fish. So, that's a good key indicator too, and that's going to be some of your first good bait to get a hold of for sure. Year. But, for flounder, I am starting near an inlet, and I'm working every deep hole that I can between where that water clears the beachfront back.
Yeah.
So I kind of break my rule of like staying in the creeks and staying out of boat traffic and all of that. And right now it's not crazy busy with boat traffic, but as we get towards the summer, that's going to definitely start to pick up. But finding those deep holes in the main structure, main bends, different things like that, deep holes, that's going to be the key spots, I feel like, for me, because that's where they're going to come in and stage out first. see what the water temperature's like, make sure everything's, groovy before they start really moving into the marsh.
Right.
So
Yeah, they're again big primary pieces of structure, like fishing those jetties, fishing those big docks. Like another thing too is every inlet that you have access to, go fish the 10 docks that are closest to it.
Yep.
This time of year. I promise you, one of those docks has redfish, trout, or flounder on it. Probably all of them. Maybe not trout, but and black drum as well, and sheepshead. I mean, they'll stage on those first docks. They're getting in there. They don't know where they're going. They're going to hang up on those first pieces. Bait are going to hang up on those first pieces of docks, and then work your way in on those docks. I mean, if you like dock banging, you like structure. I'm bringing on a guy next week to talk about just dock fishing, dock banging, which will be cool. Now, and if Mike's free, we'll have Mike on for that one as well. But picking those docks apart and knowing where to go, or knowing where the fish are, and kind of being able to follow them down those docks into their. And a lot of times they'll hang up on those docks all year long. But like I'm thinking about here, you can't fish it. But like the Coast Guard dock, every time I roll past that thing with side scan on, dude, it is loaded with fish on it, black trout, redfish, right inside the inlet. So I mean, they'll hang up on those big deep water docks that are near the inlet. Go ahead.
I was gonna say also, like, you don't have to just think about structure that you can see too. Like that's kind of what I feel like my niche is sometimes during this time of year. Is I'll go out and look for either a big oyster bar, a big drop off, big ledge, something that changes on the bottom that makes a difference for this fish to be able to stage up on. And that kind of gets me away from, everybody, especially once it starts to really warm up and get into the end of spring and the beginning of summer,
Yeah, underwater unexposed structure is... If you can have 20 of those spots in your pocket, I mean, that's going to be your best friend. I mean, it's going to allow you to be able to catch fish or target fish that are way less pressure, target areas that most people will drive right past and don't even know.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a whole lot. I mean, we talk about live bottom off the beach, but we have live bottom inshore too.
Definitely.
Like oyster bars I wouldn't necessarily consider live bottom, but there are some deep water holes near some of the inlets that have kind of that live bottomy look that you get a half mile off the beach or more.
Right.
So, and just being able to find that and pick it out on your graph, that, learning that or jigging around in that area until you snag on something and you can pull it up and see what it is. Yeah. That's how I've kind of found a lot of my spots.
Man, I think this is legal to do, but like it would be so sweet to go around with a bunch of pallets and cinder blocks and like make your own little inshore ARs in like 15 feet of water that only you know about, and you can just roll around and throw jigs at those in the summer. I'm sure big flounder would stage up on them. Like all the points around Rich's Inlet and like 12, 15 feet of water, Topsail Inlet, like you could create your own little beautiful spots.
I mean, and you think about New River, we were talking about brown water. Those ARs that are in the New River, those are going to be the first areas to really start holding flounder and stuff as those fish come in. Especially if you can find, there's a couple of them where there's points and different stuff that are close by. Yeah. Those are going to be the areas that are going to load up first.
Definitely. And a lot of these fish will swim the channels in. And so finding where those channels swing up near structure. So if you can find the deep water, like you're saying, accessing right up against a dock or against a bulkhead or any type of structure where the channel swings in tight to it, so those fish can get up shallow, get up on that structure and slide off into deep water. It's the same. It really is like, when you think about it, it's like three things that you're thinking about when fishing, but you break it down so many different ways for so many different fish in so many different areas, and they don't all look the same. They all look so different, but they're all the exact same idea. Like fish are so simple and they work in the same way, which is like, I don't know how we've done 105 podcasts talking about how to catch inshore fish, but every time it's like I feel like I'm even learning stuff new just by talking about it.
Yeah. I feel like just processing it, thinking about it in a different way.
For sure.
Or hearing somebody else, say something just slightly different, you're like, oh, that's what I was missing. I feel like I have that epiphany moment a lot of times when me and you sit down and talk. You're like, oh, I caught a fish here. I'm like, that's, that was the missing piece of the puzzle for me.
For sure.
So.
Yeah, it's just a constant puzzle that is slightly changing every day. Yep. And some pieces fit, some pieces don't fit. It's like three puzzles dumped together. It's constantly changing every day. But I'm trying to so flounder, so you will really, once that bait starts showing up, those flounder will transition shallower, but most of them are sitting a little bit deeper right now. And again, like I challenge y'all to go out this year and just try to just target flounder for the sport of targeting quality flounder inshore, because you don't have to catch flounder, you don't have to keep flounder for it to be fun. And they're really fun fish to just catch and let go. They're delicious. They're hard to let go because they're so darn good. But I mean, I had some days last year in the river, man, that was just a blast. Throwing a big 5-inch soft plastic jerkbait.
Yep.
The little jerk shad, and God, those fish thump a bait so much harder than anything else. Yeah. Like if you say you're addicted to like a trout thump, then you would like flounder fishing because flounder thump it even harder than a trout does.
Yeah. I think I just love that like dead weight feeling. Just you're like, is it bottom or is it flounder? Let it be a flounder some days, you know?
Yeah. And everyone says like don't set the hook right away on a flounder, and I feel like sometimes that's true, but other times it's not true. Like the one thing I find myself doing is like when I'm working a bait in, like twitch, let it sit, twitch, let it sit, and I feel like boom. A lot of times I'll sit there and like tap it, like just make sure that weight's still there, and I'll give it 10 seconds at most, 5 seconds, and set the hook. And I will pull fish off, but I'm not a believer that flounder chew their bait up or mouth their bait. They got a massive mouth.
Yeah.
I think what a lot of it boils down to is the shape of their mouth and the way that a jig head rides.
Yeah.
And so their mouth opens sideways, and they eat a jig, but your jig is facing up. So I think what really happens is a lot of times when you set the hook, that mouth gets opened up by the head of your jig, and that hook just has a little bit better chance of sliding out, because you think about a redfish or a trout, the top and bottom overhang.
Yeah.
And so, and the same with a flounder, overhangs but sideways, but your jig head's facing up when it gets eaten. I don't know, but I've watched underwater videos of flounder eating stuff, and it straight disappears when they eat it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think it hurts with live bait to let them sit there and chew on it.
Yeah.
But I would say if you're live bait fishing this time of year, like you don't want to let them chew on it too much because you can't keep them here in North Carolina, and you're going to end up gut hooking a lot of them. What's your opinion on the whole flounder hook set deal?
If I'm fishing live bait, I will let them eat it, 5, maybe 10 seconds, depending on the size of the mullet. The bigger the mullet, the little longer I'll let it wait, just so I make sure they get it all the way down, to where that hook is going to, because if I'm bait fishing, a lot of times, you're nose hooking that mullet. If you're throwing a 5-6 inch mullet that's nose hooked, it's got to get a long ways into that flounder's mouth for them to be able to get the hook. But when it comes to like jig fishing and stuff, as soon as I feel that weight, I'm setting the hook. Last year, I was having 15, 20 fish days. Yeah. Throwing a jig head, which, you fished more of the river than I did. You were throwing bigger bait, but like up here in the more clean water.
Yeah.
I was throwing a 4-inch Z-Man paddle tail all summer long, and then, just working it normal. Twitch, let it sit.
Yeah, it's
and they're eating it.
Yeah.
But I think the downsizing that 4-inch bait, I was catching more of a range of fish from 10, 12 inches to 15, 18, 20 inches.
Right.
Versus if you step up to that 5-inch bait, you're going to be catching a better size class of fish.
100%.
So, it's
not that the big ones won't eat little
yeah.
baits. But yeah, bigger fish, bigger meal. Why not?
Yeah.
If I'm really hungry and someone's like, and a little like 1-inch steak swims past, or I guess not swims, but slides past me on a plate right at the same time that a big old 15-ounce steak slides past me on a plate, I'm gonna grab that big steak. But who knows? We can. Big fish have been called on. Elephants eat peanuts. Big fish have been called on small baits, but. Dude, I'm getting stoked talking about the flounder fishing. It's just such a fun fish. Like, we don't have the trout to be caught on artificials in great numbers locally in the summertime.
Yeah.
And so dialing in, where to go target those flounder on artificials in the summer is just a great way to add some more to your day. You don't have to have that low tide necessarily to really get on them.
Honestly, I don't like the low tide to feed on them. Or to fish for them.
Unless you're trying to get on top water. When they're like early in the morning when they're on the edges of those flats eating that bait, dude. Oh man, they crush a topwater plug harder than just about any other fish. You've had some topwater fly eats from flounder, haven't you?
Well, I caught some on clousers, like right underneath the surface, but
that's
pretty close to topwaters.
That's fun. Yeah, dang man. What What's the water temperature you feel like when you really start seeing those flounder show up in shore good?
I feel like it really starts to kick at like 70.
70? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's around 58, 60 right now, and they're already here, but for them to really get here and really start feeding and making that move that we see in the summertime of like up onto the edges of the creeks and right along the grass lines and really start feeding like that, I feel like it's that kind of 70, 75
right
before they kind of get in that full swing of things. So,
and that can be here very quickly.
Oh yeah.
It could be here in a couple weeks. What do you like? All right, let's talk about a creek. Like you're in a creek, you're flounder fishing, and you're blind casting. Like, and you're picking spots down the bank. Like, what are you looking for? Is like where that next cast goes. Because you smoke the flounder and artificial more than really anybody I know.
So I think the biggest thing that I look for that a lot of people miss is changes in grass. If you're going down a bank and there's really, really dense grass and then all of a sudden it gets a little sparse, and I mean it can only be for a foot wide section, and then it gets dense again.
Yeah.
Every bit of bait that's going to move onto that flat where behind that grass to get away from stuff is going to use that main channel in and out where that grass gets a little bit thinner, and is not as dense. And that flounder is going to sit right outside of it.
Yeah.
Dead ends a lot of times. Like if there's just a little creek that juts off maybe 10 feet in or something, that's just a small change on the edge of the bank where it gives that flounder an ambush point, it's worth at least.
Are you trying to throw it into the back of that little creek mouth or that little pocket?
If it's a pocket that's like, 3-4 feet deep, yes. But I'm going to do that after I already fished the mouth of it.
Gotcha.
Because I feel like a lot of times the fish, they'll sit in the pocket, but they're facing out. Because
Gotcha.
I won't get bit until my bait clears kind of the edge of that point. I feel like a lot of times they're sitting kind of in the pocket and they're watching out into the main creek channel, watching for that bait to come down. And if you ever watch mullet swim down the side of a bank and all of a sudden the bank turns, those mullet, they swim out like a foot or two off the bank because all of a sudden they're like, oh no, I'm in open water, and they turn real sharp, and they try to find that grass line again. And I think that little area there is what those flounder are targeting.
Yeah, they're the little screw up by those bait fish is what they're keen in on.
So, and it's just those little changes, I think last year that made a huge difference in how many fish I was catching.
For sure.
So,
it's fun, man. It's so rewarding when you look at it. You're going in a creek, you look at a spot, you're like, God, there's a flounder sitting right there, and pitch to it. Because here in North Carolina, that's the one fish
you can count on.
that you can kind of count on sometimes to be in a spot that looks like they should be there. Now, redfish will do it about 50% of the time. Flounder will do it 75% of the time.
Yeah.
And some big ones, man. They're fun to catch. They're super fun to catch. People are always like, I don't like target them, though, because they don't fight good. But for those people, I say go fish for them in the ocean because those fish are designed to pull down. That's why, like, so many times with clients, they'll be like, I think I got a bite. I think I got a fish. And like, they're reeling it in. Their rod's kind of, I'm like, you got a flounder. Keep reeling. Yeah. And then the flounder gets to the boat and it gets a little depth underneath and it's like, because it's trying to go straight back down. But it's like pulling a piece of paper to you. When it's in a foot of water out in front of you, like, it can't do anything. It can't turn on its side and pull away. It has no ability to fight at that point. But when it gets out into that deeper water out off the bank, that's when it's going to try to pull down and go around the boat and go under. Which is that's so fun. I love that. Especially when people don't think they have a fish, they think they got an oyster shell again, and they get into the boat and it's a lot of fun.
I was gonna say that's another thing. Like, if you feel like you've got an oyster shell or something, I noticed this last year. A lot of times when I would catch fish, is they would almost just kind of slide up to the boat. And just, you wouldn't, you think you're just dragging something along, and then all of a sudden it's they kick in. Yeah. So don't sissy the hook set. Go ahead and make sure you got that fish. So, and
go ahead and have that net ready. Like, if you can just slide him straight into the net real quick, like a bass, before he goes on that second dig, that you're gonna land a lot more of them.
I was saying, flounder fishing, my net never leaves the deck of my boat. It is almost 100% of the time either between my feet or leaned up right at the back of the boat where I can just grab
it and scoop them. Yeah. They're fun fish, man. They're super fun. And again, I'll beat this point to death. Like, diversify. Don't just go catch redfish every day. Don't just go troll for Spanish mackerel. Like, force yourself to do something different, to learn something new. That's a lot of the point behind this podcast is just like helping encourage people to go out there and try something they haven't done, discuss things that they haven't done. and go out there and see what you can do with it. But we're at an hour here. I think we're going to wrap this one up. If you have enjoyed this podcast, go over and check out our Patreon page. Me and Michael are going to jump over there right now and record. We're going to actually talk about our favorite springtime baits. So for trout, flounder, and redfish, and some of our baits that we kind of keep under wraps a little bit that really do help us catch more fish in these transitionary times. Good search baits, good baits for catching all three species in the same area. So definitely check us out over on Patreon. You guys, thanks for checking out this live. We'll do some more of these lives. Like we said, this was a surprise one. So thanks to everyone that tuned in. And thank you for your support. And we look forward to seeing y'all next time. Later.